Hi, you guys. Welcome back to Meaningful Motivations with Tracey Erickson. And of course, if you are new to this channel, welcome. My name is Tracey Erickson, and in today's spooky story, I'm actually going to be telling you guys the true story that inspired the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. I'm going to go over it, so stay tuned. I just want to take a moment to tell you guys about Tracey's Apothecary. Tracey's Apothecary is my Etsy shop where I sell my handmade essential oil and crystal blends and other products for your ritual needs. So check out Tracey's Apothecary at traceysapothecary.etsy.com. I'm sure that most of you out there have experienced nightmares at some point in your life and in your dream experiences. But in today's video, the nightmare actually takes it a step further by causing real harm to the victim of the nightmare. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the true story that inspired the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. Most movie buffs have heard of the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street. And this is a horror movie that is all about the villain, Fred Krueger, otherwise known as Freddy Krueger, with the claw for the hand. A Nightmare on Elm Street is another scary movie that was wildly popular in the 1980s. And a little fun fact, A Nightmare on Elm Street was Johnny Depp's very first movie, as he played the boyfriend Glenn. In the movie, a bunch of teenagers are being plagued with nightmares that involve the villain Freddy Krueger. And in these nightmares, he's usually chasing them through some abandoned warehouse or some other very scary scenario. And it is frightening them to the point where they all feel as though the dream was more than just a dream. They thought that the nightmare was real and that the person chasing them was also real. As the movie goes on, you start to see different injuries that are inflicted during the dream time of the characters. And then they're becoming more and more convinced that all of these bad things happening to the people in their lives could actually be happening to them through their dreams by Freddy Krueger. Most people believe that this is just a fictional movie that is completely made up from the imagination of its writer. But in reality, A Nightmare on Elm Street was loosely inspired by an actual true story of Laotian men who died in their sleep. According to Wikipedia, the basis of the film was inspired by several newspaper articles printed in the Los Angeles Times in the 1970s about Hmong refugees who, after fleeing to the United States because of war and genocide in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, suffered disturbing nightmares and refused to sleep. I was actually unable to find these newspaper articles from the 1970s in the LA Times talking about these people who were having these horrible nightmares. But I was able to find one article from the New York Times that was printed in 1981, which is interesting because A Nightmare on Elm Street was actually released in 1984. So this article I found did come before the movie was ever released. The headline of the New York Times article is Nightmares Suspected in Bed Deaths of 18 Laotians. The New York Times article reads, The Federal Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta is conducting an intensive inquiry into the manner in which 18 apparently healthy Laotian refugees died mysteriously in their sleep in this country within the last 4 years. One possibility being explored is that they were frightened to death by nightmares. The article goes on to state the cause of death of the 18 refugees in their own beds in the early morning hours remains a mystery. The deaths have generally been attributed to probable cardiac arrhythmia or irregular heartbeat. Although pathologists have been reluctant to advance it publicly, one possibility being explored is an obscure pattern described in medical literature as Oriental Nightmare Death Syndrome, in which death results from terror induced by a nightmare. And at the time of these deaths, all of the people who were affected in this strange occurrence were in perfectly good health in their daily waking lives. The article also states that no one really thought anything was amiss until there were actually 5 deaths related to this strange occurrence, all within the Laotian population of the Hmong people, and those deaths occurred within the Minneapolis and St. Paul area. So that is when they started to kind of see a little pattern in who these deaths were really affecting. Dr. Michael McGee said that his own search of the medical literature had disclosed the startling possibility that the 4 who died in St. Paul, all apparently healthy young men, might literally have been frightened to death. The syndrome is called bangungut, a Filipino word for nightmare, and is described in medical literature as nightmare death syndrome. The fatal affliction, Dr. McGee said, has been suggested as the cause of death in similar cases among young Filipino males between 30 and 40 years old. And as far as the LA Times is concerned, I was able to find an article about some related deaths that had taken place, but this article was from January 11th of 1987. And the headline reads, "Medical experts seek clues to nightmare deaths that strike male Asian refugees." And in this LA Times article, it states that since April 1983, at least 130 Southeast Asian refugees have left this world in essentially the same way. They cried out in their sleep, and then they died. And this article from the LA Times in 1987 also goes on to describe the syndrome of the deaths that take place during these night terrors. They even bring up that Filipino word for nightmare, just like the New York Times article did in 1981. And it says, spurred by curiosity and concern, Kirshner, an associate professor of pathology at the University of Chicago, undertook a systematic study of the problem. His results, based on data from the Federal Centers for Disease Control and autopsies of 18 night terror victims, were recently reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The victims had much in common, Kirshner found. First and foremost, that nothing seemed to be wrong with them before they suddenly died. These are all healthy men with no previous symptoms. The average age was 33, he says. The situation is almost always the same. It only occurs in men, and it only occurs in their sleep. The report is they cry out and die, or are found dead the next morning. And Kirshner goes on to speculate that a lot of these deaths could be happening due to stress, because a lot of the victims of these nighttime death syndromes were happening within the first 2 years of the refugees' arrival into the United States or into their new home. So let's take a look at these Hmong people to see exactly how different their culture really was compared to the culture they were moved into when they came to the United States. Now, going back to that New York Times article from 1981, that article actually states the Hmong came from an isolated culture similar to that of the American Indian. Most of those who have been resettled in this country live in concentrated communities in Missoula, Montana, Santa Ana, California, Providence, Rhode Island, Denver, and Minneapolis, St. Paul, where is their largest number of 10,000 to 12,000 of these Hmong people reside. Now, also according to that New York Times article, it states that very few of these Hmong people speak English, and their own language became a written language only a few years before this article was written in 1981. And their adaptation to American life has been marginal, until some relatively recent conversions to Buddhism and Christianity. Their religion is animist, governed by spirits and manifestations of the soul. According to dictionary.com, animism is the attribution of a soul to plants, inanimate objects, and natural phenomena. It is also the belief in a supernatural power that organizes and animates the material universe. So from the sounds of it, these Hmong people were just living their lives and following their own way, probably forever, until some kind of unrest took place in their land area, causing them to become refugees, and now they are just misplaced, not only from their culture and the land that they're used to, but they're in a completely new land with completely new beliefs and a totally different way of living. So I think a lot of the people that were affected by this nighttime terror death were probably under, like Kirshner said, an extreme amount of stress. Now, I also know from my own experience that if you're having a very potent dream experience, those can actually come through and kind of bleed through into your waking life. So, for instance, something that happens in your dream could also be showing itself in the way your body feels. So, you may dream of having spiders crawling all over your skin, only to wake up to all of your skin tingling as those spiders were really crawling all over your skin. And I think that many people out there have heard of the idea of someone dying from a broken heart. A lot of times this happens when you have an elderly couple where one of them have died and they've been together for such a long time that the loved one's death caused so much heartache in the last surviving of the couple, only for that person to die shortly after. So if you believe that someone can die of a broken heart, and if you know you've had experiences in your dream time that have bled through to your waking time, then I don't see how this isn't a strong possibility that these Asian men who are healthy and of a youthful age between 30 and 40 years old are just suddenly dying. And it's due to an extreme level of stress. I thought that this story was so interesting because I honestly had no idea that A Nightmare on Elm Street was loosely inspired by a true story. Now, when I say inspired, it is very loosely inspired. Anyone who has seen A Nightmare on Elm Street knows that it's a very bloody and grisly death that these people go through during their nightmares. But in real life, there were absolutely no injuries that could be seen on these bodies. So in the real life story, these people were simply dying in their sleep. Sometimes it was noted that they would be screaming while they slept and died shortly after. Have you ever heard of this, where there were all of these Hmong people just dying in their sleep. And did you know that A Nightmare on Elm Street was loosely inspired by this true story? Let me know in the comments section down below. Well, that about wraps it up for this video. So if you like this video, be sure to click that like button and share this video with all your friends out there. And of course, if you're a viewer but not yet a subscriber, I would just love for you to click subscribe down below. And once you have subscribed, you can turn on that notifications bell if you would like to be notified each and every time I upload a new video. Thank you guys so much for watching and spending your time with me. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye.